alone!
Get off there!
Get back! Dive!
Watch out!
June 5th, 2021. A hot Saturday afternoon at Oceanworld Marine Park. Families packed the stands expecting a milestone celebration, the 300th live Orca performance by senior trainer Emily Kadau. Music blasted, children cheered, cameras rolled, but within minutes the celebration collapsed into chaos. From the blue water below, an 11,000-pound bull orca named Vesper broke formation. In a single surge, he seized his trainer. In front of 2,500 stunned spectators, the spectacle became a scene of horror. Emily vanished beneath the surface and would never surface alive. When you keep a storm sealed in a bottle, eventually the bottle shatters. On that day, ocean worlds shattered in public view. This was not a freak accident. It was the return of a predator to its nature. A captive killer whale exerting raw power in front of families, tourists, and cameras. What unfolded forced the world to confront a simple truth: when humans ignore warning signs, nature doesn't forget. It warms me to think of each listener, and I'd be grateful if you shared where in the world you are listening from. Emily Kadau was only 24 when her career and her life ended in the most violent way possible. She was born and raised in Sarasota, Florida, just a short drive from the very marine park she would one day call home. From childhood, she was captivated by the ocean, not just its beauty, but the life it held. While most kids her age pinned posters of pop stars on their walls, Emily's room was lined with photographs of orcas, dolphins, and coral reefs. Her ambition was clear. At 19, she secured a prize internship at Oceanworld, a first step into a dream career. By 21, she had risen to full-time trainer. By 23, she carried the title of senior orca handler, a rare responsibility for someone so young. Colleagues described her as steady, calm under pressure, and uniquely gifted in reading the moods of the whales. When routines broke down, she was the one they called. Her bond with Vesper was legendary inside the park. One trainer remembered he'd ignore everyone else, but when Emily walked in, he surfaced like he'd been waiting only for her. Many saw it as trust. Others now see it as miscalculation. Emily believed in the mission, believed in the idea that humans and apex predators could coexist through discipline and care. But predators never forget instinct. The old saying warns you can teach a lion tricks, but it still remembers the hunt. Vesper never forgot, and the bond everyone admired was, in reality, a fragile line stretched across immense risk. Oceanworld Marine Park opened its gates in 1986 and quickly became a giant in marine entertainment. Drawing more than 1.2 million visitors every year, it sold families the promise of wonder dolphins spinning through hoops, sea lions balancing firelit rings, and orcas hurling their massive bodies skyward in choreographed stunts. To the public, it was awe. To the company, it was profit. But behind the glossy performances, the cost was mounting. For decades, animal rights groups raised alarms, staging protests at the gates. Management dismissed them. The shows stayed full, the revenue stayed high. Yet beneath the surface, cracks spread. Internal reports flagged a troubling pattern: the orcas were changing. They were less consistent, their movements more erratic, their training harder to maintain. Attendance began to dip, but executives pressed forward, insisting the program was safe. Few wanted to admit the truth that the foundation of their empire was unstable, and the animals were showing it. Vesper was the centerpiece of that empire. At 6 tons, he was one of the largest whales ever kept at Oceanworld, a giant whose sheer presence dominated the tank. Born in captivity, he had never once touched the open ocean. His mother died during transport when he was a calf, an early trauma that left a permanent scar. Trainers whispered that his unpredictable streak came from that loss, compounded by a lifetime in confinement. His aggression wasn't random. It was the consequence of years spent inside concrete walls. The crowd saw entertainment. What they were really watching was a storm waiting to break. Among the orcas at Oceanworld, many had been born generation after generation in captivity. But Vesper's case stood apart, and for all the wrong reasons. His birth was marked by tragedy. His mother died during transport when he was still a calf. In the wild, male orcas form lifelong bonds with their mothers, learning not only survival skills, but complex social behaviors. Vesper never had that chance. Deprived of the anchor of family, he grew up isolated inside concrete walls, his instincts reshaped by confinement. Trainers often said his personality carried a volatility that no one could quite predict. Some days he seemed cooperative, a massive black and white shadow gliding alongside his handler in flawless synchronization. The audience roared as he breached, soaked in the spotlight, and for a moment it seemed like harmony. But then came the other days when his eyes turned flat and unreadable, when his body jerked through the water with sudden aggression, when every movement suggested restraint, barely holding back violence. To some it looked like mood swings. To others it was evidence of something far deeper, a predator nursing a grudge against the life forced upon him. In the weeks before Emily's last performance, Vesper's behavior took a darker turn. Trainers began to whisper that he was withdrawing, pulling into himself. Reports noted long spells of circling in the far corners of the pool, ignoring hand signals, slapping his tail against the water so violently it echoed across the stadium walls. One trainer admitted later that the sound felt less like play and more like a warning. Emily herself sensed it too. She watched him closely, unsettled by the shift, but still hoping that this was temporary, just another phase in the long rhythm of training. The shift grew harder to ignore. Just days before the show, Vesper refused outright to participate in a morning session. Instead, he swam in tight, repetitive circles, his tail crashing down again and again. His behavior wasn't random, it mirrored classic signs of captivity stress. Emily made notes recording every detail, the refusals, the tail slaps, the refusal to follow commands. She voiced her concerns quietly to colleagues, but her confidence in management's willingness to listen was fading. She knew the patterns and she knew enough to recognize danger. The truth is, no amount of training could erase what lay just beneath his skin. An orca's instincts don't disappear. They wait. Trainers like Emily live by routine, believing consistency built trust. But Vesper was rewriting the rules. His behaviors weren't accidents. They were statements. Every refusal to obey, every cold stare, every slap against steel was a test of boundaries. And Emily, despite her skill and patience, was standing closer to the edge of that boundary than anyone realized. In captivity, the smallest changes matter. A shift in the eyes, a refusal to breach the angle of a tail slap, all are signals. For weeks, Emily tracked them like cracks forming in a dam. At first subtle, then sharper, louder, impossible to ignore. She noticed the tail slaps grow violent, not celebratory. She saw his eyes harden where once there had been flashes of recognition. And most alarming of all, she saw him begin charging the underwater gates. The sight of 6 tons of muscle hammering into steel was unmistakable. Each impact rattled the walls of the enclosure and sent shock waves through the pool. To outsiders, it may have looked like rough play. To those with experience, it was something else entirely, a desperate attempt to escape confinement. Orcas that charge gates are broadcasting a message: they are done performing, done tolerating, and they want out. Emily recognized this for what it was, and the word she used was clear: dangerous. She documented it carefully. Reports went up the chain outlining how Vesper ignored signals, how his aggression was escalating. She described the tail slaps not as play, but as threats. She emphasized that charging the gates wasn't routine misbehavior. It was desperation. In an email to senior management, she put it in plain words: he is not safe to work with. Emily urged them to reconsider his role in the upcoming summer showcase. She wasn't speaking as a young trainer chasing attention. She was speaking as the most experienced handler of Vesper, the one who had seen him up close for years. The reply she received was curt. "He just needs more stimulation," a senior manager wrote. "Let's not cause panic before the summer launch. We can manage his behavior." The message was clear: the show mattered more than the risk. With thousands of tickets sold and a packed marketing campaign underway, Oceanworld wasn't willing to cancel. They promised to keep an eye on him, but the decision was already made. The performance would proceed. Emily wasn't reassured. She knew enrichment toys and extra feedings weren't solutions. What Vesper needed was something Oceanworld could never provide: space freedom and family bonds that no trainer could replicate. Instead, management's strategy was distraction. They would gamble that one of the largest captive predators on Earth could be coaxed into cooperation for one more show. But as history would soon prove, that gamble was fatal. In hindsight, the warnings were unmistakable. The signs had escalated from subtle refusals to full-scale threats, yet each was brushed aside in the pursuit of revenue and spectacle. The louder the signs, the deeper the denial. For Emily, the stage was already set. She had done her part, she had spoken, she had warned, she had put it in writing. But at Oceanworld, warnings carried little weight against the bottom line. And so the show went on. The Florida sun scorched down on Oceanworld Marine Park that afternoon, the heat rising from the concrete walkways as 2,500 guests packed the grandstand. The date was June 5th, 2021, and the air buzzed with the energy of a sellout crowd. This was no ordinary show. It was the 300th live performance, a milestone the park had hyped for weeks. Families fanned themselves with brochures, cameras readied. No one knew that within minutes, excitement would turn to terror. Emily Kadau had rehearsed this routine countless times. She knew every cue, every signal, every high-energy dive. She also knew Vesper had been restless in recent weeks, more unpredictable than usual, but there was no option to back out. The tickets were sold, the spotlight fixed. Dressed in her wetsuit, she flashed a practiced smile as she walked into the deck. Any doubts stayed buried. For the audience, it had to look effortless. She slid into the pool water, glinting under the afternoon sun. For a few moments, everything worked. Vesper cut through the blue depths like a blade, his massive body synchronized with hers, each turn rehearsed to precision. Applause thundered, children-pointed parents captured videos. Emily's movements were fluid, confident, her posture radiating control. For an instant, the illusion held trainer and predator moving as one. But as the performance built toward its finale, a high-speed synchronized breach, Vesper's rhythm shifted. Witnesses would later describe it as sudden, like a switch flipped. He veered off course, circling behind Emily. One guest recalled, "He just lunged, no warning. 1 second they were swimming, the next he had her. The orca's jaws clamped around her waist with crushing force, and in a flash, the trainer became prey. The attack was violent and immediate. Vesper thrashed her through the water with terrifying power, her body spinning like a rag doll. The 6-ton predator shook her with the force of a storm surge. Trainers on deck froze, then scrambled. At first, the audience gasped, unsure whether it was part of the act. But the illusion shattered as Emily failed to resurface. Panic rippled through the stands. Screams pierced the stadium as the reality sank in. The orca was not performing. He was attacking. Staff rushed into emergency protocols. Buzzers blared, nets dropped, lifeguards grabbed poles and ropes. But Vesper ignored every distraction. He clamped tighter, driving her deeper beneath the surface. The pool, once crystal blue, began to cloud with red. Chaos spread through the crowd. Parents pulled children away, others stood frozen in disbelief. Some covered their mouths, unable to look, yet unable to turn away. The water erupted as Vesper twisted, slamming against the pool's walls, with Emily still locked in his jaws. Each violent movement sent shockwaves through the water, shaking the bleachers themselves. Trainers shouted commands, their voices lost under the roar of the crowd. Buckets of fish were hurled into the pool, but the orca didn't glance at them. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't following cues. He was acting on raw instinct. The rescue team knew the protocols: create distractions, block escape paths, deploy nets, but every step failed. Vesper was beyond control. From the stands, witnesses saw blood spreading faster, now swirling in crimson clouds that stained the water. Emily's body was seen only in flashes between the orca's thrashing arcs. Every twist of his frame was a reminder that no human strength could match him. "It looked like a storm in the water," one bystander later said, and she was just gone in it. Minutes dragged on each second, stretching into agony. The staff worked frantically, but every attempt ended the same. Vesper dove, resurfaced, and dove again with Emily still in his grip. This was not the trained performer they had built shows around for years. This was an apex predator reclaiming control. By the time rescue divers managed to draw him off and retrieve her, Emily's body was lifeless. The pool, once the centerpiece of a celebration, had become a crime scene of nature unleashed. For the audience, the sound of laughter and applause was replaced by screams and sobs. For trainers, the routine turned into a nightmare unfolding before their eyes. And for Vesper, it was no act. It was the breaking point of years in captivity, an explosion of instinct long suppressed. Even after Emily's body was pulled from the water, the chaos continued. Trainers hurled fish buckets, slamming the surface with poles was anything to pull Vesper back into compliance. But the truth was undeniable. The animal wasn't rebelling against a cue. He was rebelling against the life built around him. On June 5th, the cage broke, and when it did, there was no saving the handler who had trusted him most. The trainers tried every tool at their disposal, recall buzzers, sharp whistles, synchronized claps, even pounding the surface of the water. Nothing broke Vesper's grip. He was beyond cues, beyond training, operating on a level that no human command could reach. Panic set in as staff realized that every second Emily remained underwater was another second closer to death. The crowd was ushered toward the exits, but many froze in place, unable to look away. What they were witnessing was not a performance gone wrong. It was an animal reclaiming itself in real time. 29 minutes. That was the official length of the struggle before Emily's body could finally be recovered. Nearly half an hour of chaos, of desperate attempts to distract or restrain an orca that weighed more than 3 cars combined. Hope lingered in these minutes that she might still be alive, that somehow she could be resuscitated. But when paramedics reached her on the pool deck, the truth was undeniable. Emily Kadau was gone. The sterile pronouncement of death cut through the panic like ice. For those who had worked beside her, the confirmation was devastating. Emily was more than just a trainer. She had been the face of the program, the one who seemed to bridge the impossible gap between human and predator. Now she lay lifeless, and all the years of dedication, the bond she believed in, were erased in an instant. The park's medical team could only pronounce her dead at the scene. There was no chance of revival. The autopsy the next day put clinical words to what witnesses had already seen. Multiple blunt force trauma injuries consistent with violent thrashing and tail strikes. Massive internal bleeding. Fractures across her torso, and finally the line that chilled investigators' cause of death: drowning. Emily had not only been battered, she had been held underwater until her lungs filled. The report also noted severe tissue damage to her legs and shoulder, evidence of the crushing bite itself. It was not a performance accident, it was a predatory assault. The findings spread quickly through the marine science community, and the implications were stark. A 6-ton bull orca, confined since birth, had done what wild instincts dictated when stress and captivity collided. The same animal that had once performed flawless, synchronized routines had in his final act turned on the handler who trusted him most. For Emily's family and colleagues, the loss was almost impossible to grasp. She had dedicated her life to these animals. In return, captivity itself had taken her. Friends and co-workers tried to process what had happened, but answers were scarce. Many repeated the same sentiment: this wasn't nature claiming one of its own like a shark striking in open seas. This was something different. This was captivity, frustration, and warning signs ignored. The sea takes what it wants when it wants, one colleague said. But this wasn't the sea. This was us creating a prison and then acting shocked when the prisoner revolted. Within hours, Oceanworld's management team scrambled to contain the fallout. Lawyers, executives, and PR specialists convened behind closed doors, drafting statements as the news cycle caught fire. By the time the evening broadcast aired, the park had issued a press release. Their wording was deliberate: a tragic accident during a training demonstration. Framed as unforeseen, unavoidable, unpredictable. The message was simple: no one could have known. But behind that polished statement, staff knew otherwise. Emily's warnings, the detailed reports she filed, the emails she sent, none of it made the official narrative. There was no mention of tail slaps, of charging gaits, of rising aggression. No mention of her written plea that he was unsafe to work with. To the public, it was just a tragedy. Inside the park, it was a cover-up. In the weeks that followed, cracks appeared in that facade. Anonymous emails began to circulate among journalists and investigators. Whistleblowers within the park, unwilling to let Emily's death be written off as an accident, leaked evidence. One email in particular changed everything. They deleted all behavior reports from the Orca's file, every flagged aggression, every documented sign of stress gone. They didn't want it in the record. They didn't want anyone to know how bad it was. The revelation hit the industry like a tidal wave. It confirmed what many had long suspected, that beneath the spectacle of choreographed routines, there was a darker reality being buried. A young trainer's death was not unforeseen. It was the inevitable result of warnings ignored, instincts suppressed, and profit prioritized. The truth was breaking free, and this time, Oceanworld would not be able to contain it. Vesper's warning signs had been obvious tail slaps, charging gates, outright refusals. Trainers documented them, and Emily herself put the danger in writing. But when profits were at stake, management chose silence. Reports were scrubbed, files erased, evidence deleted. Protect the brand, protect the investment that was the priority. When public outrage grew, government officials were forced to respond. An inquiry was launched, but even from the start, few believed it would be the reckoning Emily's death demanded. Behind the scenes, Oceanworld's lawyers worked with precision, shaping the narrative before investigators could even gather momentum. They controlled the interviews, filtered the documents, and steered the scope of the inquiry. Despite mounting evidence of negligence, the official conclusion landed with a thud: no criminal charges would be filed. The tragedy was labeled unavoidable, an accident that no one could have foreseen. It was the clean outcome management wanted, and it left Emily's family with nothing but questions. For the public, it felt like betrayal. What was framed as justice became little more than a shield for corporate interests. The inquiry that should have exposed systemic failures dissolved into legal jargon and hollow reassurances. Meanwhile, Vesper, the orca at the center of it all, was quietly removed from the show lineup. He was transferred to a barren isolation tank, a symbolic punishment for a crime that wasn't his. In truth, it was never about discipline. It was about optics. Alone, stripped of interaction, Vesper remained as much a prisoner as before, only now behind even thicker walls. Trainers who had once worked with him saw the decision as little more than theater. A leopard doesn't change its spots, the saying goes, and isolation didn't erase the scars of captivity. If anything, it deepened them. The tragedy was never about one violent act. It was about years of neglect, greed, and denial that had led to it. Yet Oceanworld pressed forward. The shows continued, tourists kept coming, the profits flowed. On the surface, the park carried on as if nothing had changed. But among those who had known Emily, the shadow of June 5th never lifted. For her family, for colleagues who had trained beside her, the memory of blood in the water could not be washed away. 2 months later, without announcement, Oceanworld quietly ended its live orca shows. No press conference, no statement of closure. One day the shows were scheduled, the next, they were gone as if erased from the calendar. For the public, it felt like an attempt to bury the past, to let the memory of what happened fade with time. But for the 2,500 witnesses who sat in that stadium, forgetting was impossible. Vesper's fate became a subject of rumor and speculation. He was moved under cover of night to an off-site facility. The transfer was explained as routine veterinary care, but insiders knew better. It was damage control. Oceanworld wanted distance from the animal that had shattered their narrative of harmony. By removing him, they hoped the controversy would move with him. Yet whispers trickled out from staff who remained. Emails surfaced painting a grim picture of Vesper in isolation. His aggression hadn't subsided, it had escalated. In July, just weeks after Emily's death, he lunged at a male trainer during a feeding session. The trainer barely escaped with his life. An anonymous message described him plainly: he's a time bomb. No one knows when he'll explode again. The accounts painted a disturbing reality. The orca who had once been the centerpiece of Oceanworld's empire was unraveling, a captive giant spiraling into frustration and rage. His isolation only sharpened it. Yet to the public, none of this was acknowledged. Officially, he was under observation. Unofficially, he had become proof of what happens when instinct collides with captivity. Oceanworld worked tirelessly to bury that truth. They didn't want Vesper to become a symbol, didn't want his story tied to Emily's death. But among those who leaked information, the message was clear: the damage was not contained. It had spread to the very animal they had built their empire on. For Emily, the cost was her life. For Vesper, the cost was his sanity. As the months passed, public curiosity grew. What had happened to the Orca? Why were the shows gone? Oceanworld refused to answer. Their silence spoke louder than any statement could. Behind closed doors, a predator bred for spectacle had become an emblem of captivity's darkest truth. And the longer they kept him hidden, the more that truth threatened to surface. In the weeks that followed, Vesper's fate became a story of its own. Rumors swirled. Some said he had been euthanized, quietly put down to prevent another tragedy. Others claimed he was transferred overseas, hidden away in another facility where his aggression could be kept out of the public eye. The truth was never confirmed. Like so much of the aftermath, it dissolved into secrecy. In the end, his fate mirrored captivity itself, a life reduced to shadows, concealed from view, existing only in whispers. For those who had known Emily, and for those who understood what had unfolded behind the park's glossy facade, the scars remained permanent. Emily's death was not just the loss of a trainer, it was the exposure of a system built on denial. The Orca's isolation was never justice. It was a symbol of an industry unwilling to face its own reflection. Out of sight, out of mind. But the memory of blood in the water could not be erased. Public reaction was immediate and explosive. What began as quiet grief inside Sarasota spread like wildfire across the internet. Hashtags like #justice for Emily trended worldwide. The questions grew louder with every post. Why were Emily's warnings ignored? Why was profit prioritized over safety? The anger was visible, the grief raw. Within days, the backlash became a storm that no press release could contain. The story leapt from social media to national headlines. News anchors dissected every second of footage, and YouTube channels dedicated to animal rights amplified the tragedy. Activists who had long warned of the dangers of captivity now had an unshakable example: a young trainer killed by the very animal she had loved. They turned Emily's story into a rallying cry, and the message was clear enough, was enough. The momentum built into action. A global petition calling for an end to captive Orca performances spread across platforms, collecting over 1.4 million signatures in a matter of weeks. People from countries far beyond the United States, many who had never stepped foot in a marine park, added their names. Emily's death had become a line in the sand, and the world responded. Oceanworld felt the shift immediately. Their stock prices tumbled, attendance plummeted, and their once celebrated brand was dragged into the center of a global debate. Soon, other marine parks across the country began scaling back their shows. Some ended their Orca programs entirely quietly, closing the curtain on an era of spectacle that now carried the weight of blood. As the saying goes, what's done in the dark will always come to light. And for Oceanworld, the darkness had been exposed. Emily's death was not buried under press statements. It became a movement, one that forced an industry to change course. The tide had turned. The empire of captive performances would never fully recover. In death, Emily Kadau became more than a trainer. She became a warning etched into history, a reminder that no matter how well trained, no matter how rehearsed, a predator remains a predator. Orcas cannot be chained forever. Their instincts will surface, and when they do, the cost is measured in lives. Her legacy was painful, but it was also undeniable. Her story forced the world to confront captivity's truth that the exploitation of these animals endangers both them and us. Emily died doing what she loved, but her death revealed the consequence of ignoring nature's limits. The message is simple: caging power does not erase it. The Orca's fate remains unknown, but Emily's warning endures. She showed us that the line between control and catastrophe is razor thin. Her death was not an accident, it was a turning point. A reminder that captivity has consequences for trainer and animal alike. If you believe these creatures deserve freedom, join the call. Subscribe, share, and spread Emily's story, because silence is what allows history to repeat itself. Together we can ensure that her death was not just a tragedy, but the catalyst for lasting change.